Okay.
So that
Okay. So we'll get underway. There's six of us here. So I expect that around eight or nine, the others can join in. So welcome everybody. This is Goel. For many of you, this is probably your first time hearing my voice. Um, Perhaps you understand why I use a British text-to-speech accent guy on a lot of the podcasts. I'm kind of self-conscious about it, but whatever. Uh, this is tutorial number 2. It's building credible connections through research. And at this stage of like training you to do some of what I do, it's going to be very elementary. Some of you may be beyond this. A lot of you, this might be your first exposure to this sort of thing. So the order of business for tonight is the general overview and introduction, genealogy, um, credible accusations measured by known statistics, things to avoid in your investigation, specific tools, style preferences, and source material and spreadsheets, notes, tools, examples of that. Um, so the first thing that I focus on in any criminal organization that I investigate are the family relationships. So genealogy is a means of unmasking criminal sexual rings. And the reason for that is going to become clear in just a second. Does everybody hear me? Does everybody hear me?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, good. So just if you have any questions or whatnot, hit me up in chat. If
yes,
you
we
can't
can
hear
hear
me,
you.
okay, good. All
Sorry, I
right.
was just trying to keep off and in mute so that it wouldn't disturb.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure. Um,
Yes.
so genealogy is a means of unmasking. One of the things that you have to understand in pedophile rings is that family is everything. So you got to understand certain key facts. So 93% of child sexual abuse victims are abused by somebody that they know. That breaks down to a 34-59 split between family members or an associate, like a family friend, a teacher, a coach, or a neighbor. But it's somebody who's known by the child and somebody who's usually known by the parent. And so when you take allegations from purported victims, you're going to understand that credible allegations will reflect this 93 to 7% um, split between known perpetrators and unknown perpetrators. Non credible allegations will not reflect this. Outside of abduction scenarios, it is incredibly rare for a child to be raped or sexually assaulted by a stranger. It rarely happens. So if there's a kidnapping component, that lends credibility to the idea that a stranger would have, abducted and raped a child. Outside of that, it really doesn't happen. I've been doing this for 22 years, and I can tell you from my experience that the academic literature, the studies that have been done, are credible in this respect. So the overwhelming majority of sexual abusers are male, almost 99%. And that number stays at around 90% or 90% plus the further down in age you go. So when you're talking about someone who's under the age of 6, it's almost exclusively a male abuser. Um, the further up you go, sometimes it goes up, but it's exponentially higher for men than than women. So overall, you're looking at children, males make up 96% of offenders. For females who abuse children, the overwhelming majority of those female offenders are going to operate with a male partner, such as a spouse or a boyfriend. And that's incredibly true in the LDS Church of Satan case. Every single one of these female abusers is paired with a male abuser, like a spouse or a boyfriend, or it's somebody like David Lee Hamlin who's pimping his children out to somebody like Ann Meacham Gregerson or Richard Lloyd Anderson, who was pimping out his grandchildren to people like Ann Meacham Gregerson. So again, credible sexual abuse allegations for children will reflect this fact. It's extremely rare for a lone female offender to abuse children. It's just It rarely happens. Yeah, I'm not saying it doesn't happen at all, but it's incredibly rare. Usually there will be a male involved, and the male will be dominant in that abusive relationship. So, family structure is another important predictor of abuse that we would look at. If you have a stepfather in the home, that is an incredible indication that a child is at risk for abuse. They're 8 times more likely to kill children in their care compared to genetic or biological parents. Stepmothers are 3 times more likely to kill children in their care compared to genetic or biological parents. You've got children in foster care who are 4 times more likely to be abused than their peers who are with their biological parents.
Mm.
So, more than half of recovered sex trafficking victims recovered through the FBI raids in 2013 were from foster care or group homes. So, as a child, if you're looking at a child, you're looking at a single parent who has a live in partner. That's 20 times more likely to be a victim of sexual abuse than a child living with both biological parents. A child whose parent is not in the labor force is 3 times the risk for sexual abuse. And it doesn't have to be the parent who's abusing them. The parent can use the child as a commodity. They can sell the child to somebody who approaches the family as like a benefactor, someone benevolent, and grooms the family in addition to the child. Like, I want to take a special interest in your child. I want to mentor them. I want to spend time with them. I want to pay them attention. And that family being, financially, destitute is vulnerable to that pressure. They just want to see their child benefit from something. They don't necessarily have to deliberately say, I'm pimping out my child to get money from this perpetrator, but it could just be an innocent thing where they think, oh, great, my child's receiving all of this attention, all of these financial benefits, that sort of thing. So offenders are going to seek out victims who fit those profiles. So you're looking at single parent children, you're looking at divorced parents, you're looking at poor or unemployed parents, and especially children with cognitive, physical, or mental disabilities. And the offenders will seek out employment that puts them into proximity with children, especially children who fit the profiles mentioned above. So when you look at the LDS Church of Satan, you see David Lee Hamlin treating not just adults, but children in his therapy practice. You see David Lee Hamlin and Joe Binion having youth callings in their respective wards. So that puts them in a position of access to children. It also puts them in a position of authority over children. So the tragic thing about this is 1/3 of child sexual abuse victims will become adults who sexually abuse children. Um, and you see that in the LDS Church of Satan case. The girls allege that their father and their uncle, David Lee Hamlin and Stephen Hamlin, were trained by their grandfather, Robert Lee Hamlin, and their mother, Mary June Adams Hamlin, to do what they did. You see the scene at Gordon Bowen's home, where Carla Jimison's daughter was anally raped by a 14-year-old boy at the direction of Gordon Bowen. And you see Gordon Bowen in his divorce trial. There was testimony that in a deposition, there was testimony that he was raped by a family friend while his father watched. So what you're seeing is that this statistic holds true among the adult members of the Church of Satan who were named offenders in the Hamlin case. So when you're looking at all of these factors that I've just mentioned, they're going to provide a checklist for you as an investigative researcher to filter data through to determine whether or not the allegations are credible, whether they fit what is known through scientific studies and academic literature. And if your suspect fits into these categories, the probability of their guilt skyrockets. The likelihoods that the allegations against them are credible rises with each category that I mentioned that they fit into as individuals. Conversely, if they don't fit into the categories of likely abusers, the likelihood that the allegations against them are false increases. So one of the things that you have to be very careful when you're talking about these types of allegations, just because someone has been accused of this doesn't mean that they did it. False accusations are incredibly rare. It's under 10%. But you want to measure any allegation that you receive or that you become aware of against what's known in the academic literature and the scientific studies that have been done to determine whether or not the accusation is credible. Um, so your victim categories are very important as well. A girl is 2 to 3 times more likely to be molested than a boy, and a child with disabilities is almost 3 times more likely to be molested. A boy who is molested, the things that you'll see in his life as he gets older, he's going to be almost 5 times more likely to be involved in a teen pregnancy. So if you remember Tom Green, the polygamist, his son William at 18 was married, and he was also cruising MySpace to find a 13-year-old girl that he raped. You're going to see things like that emerge over their teenage years. Children who are sexually abused have a 2 to 3 times greater likelihood of substance dependency, is alcohol and drugs, and they're 3 to 5 times more likely to have delinquency and truancy problems. So in the Hamlin case, in the victim statements, in the police reports, and in the findings of fact from his custody hearing, the court explicitly excoriated him for not getting his children to school on a regular basis. The victim statements reflected that they were routinely late to school because they were being molested in the morning by their mother and by David Lee Hamlin at times. So then you have the next factor. Child sexual abuse victims are twice as likely to run away from home. If you look at the Hamlin police reports that are released, there are a significant amount of them that reflect police being called to the Hamlin residence or Roselle Hamlin's residence during the separation and divorce proceedings because her children were taking the car and leaving. There were curfew violations. In fact, our daughters were arrested in certain cases for that and cited. So these are indications, these are the things that you would expect to see for a child sexual abuse victim. As it pertains to the Hamlin case, the aforementioned facts make it more likely than not that David Hamlin and Roselle Stephen were abusing their children. Their daughters did repeatedly try to run away from home. They report that in their victim statements. It shows up in the police reports. The truancy is specifically noted by the court in the Hamlin findings of fact from his custody order and hearing. You've got drugs that were involved, specifically peyote and pharmaceuticals. And the girls reported repeated instances of pregnancy as a teenager. So the drugs, the truancy, the issues with staying home, being in at curfew, that sort of thing. This is not my opinion. It's not merely the girl's allegation. This is documented fact in police reports. It's documented fact in the Hamlin findings of fact. Just as I say that the court found that by clear and convincing evidence that he molested his two oldest daughters, Rachel and Eliza. So these are facts. And because we have those facts, we know that it rises beyond the level of allegations. This was found in a court of law to be the case. Again, you're just building brick by brick a foundation of credibility for these allegations to say, okay, we need to proceed further. Because if they're not lying about their parents, there's a very good chance they're not lying about the other adults. So, as it pertains to the wider groups of CS families, the allegations fit what is known about pedophile and child sexual abuse offenders. 3 of the 4 Anderson children, Richard Lloyd Anderson and Karma Anderson's children, were adopted. You got Nathan, Garrett, and Shawnee. Only one was a biological child. That's Roselle. David and Shalom Levitt have adopted and fostered multiple children over the years. Many within the wider Church of Satan network of families have adopted or they have disabled children. You've got children with Down syndrome. You've got children who are developmentally disabled from childhood accidents or injuries. You have the adult children of the CS families accused in the victim statements are known to have mental illnesses. Emily Sheets is one of those children. All 4 Hamlin children have had mental health issues as adults by their own admission. So when you're seeing this, it's just more corroboration and more confirmation that these allegations are potentially true, or they are absolutely proven true in a court of law in certain cases. So when I say family is everything, what you're going to see when you conduct your research into allegations of child sexual abuse or divorce, there's going to be living partners for single parents, step parents, foster or adopted or disabled children, truancy, delinquency, substance abuse or dependency, children being arrested for criminal behavior, children exhibiting poor social skills and academic performance or inappropriate sexual behavior. You're going to see things like incontinence issues, which one of the Hamlin children had at school. She
Mhm.
mentioned that in her victim statements. You're going to see accused offenders who inevitably have other alleged offenses or victims, like Timothy Nathan Tuttle, the Hamlin girls' uncle by their aunt Cree Tuttle. He was convicted of molesting, guess what? His adopted daughter.
Yeah,
Um, so it's just one thing after another like that you'll see that. You'll see patterns of infidelity among the parents and step parents, or a history of parents who were abused as children. You're going to see adult children who are accused of sexual offenses. Sometimes they will evade conviction. Um, you have substance abuse problems, issues with employment, mental health issues, and issues with steady employment. You look at the adults, children of the CES, and you don't necessarily think of Karma Anderson or Karma DeYoung Anderson as one of those children, but according to the victim statements, Karma's children routinely talked to her grandchildren about how she had to be admitted to mental health facilities over the course of her life for mental health issues. And that holds true with what the girls say, that she was molested as a child by their great grandfather, Garrett DeYoung Jr. So when you're talking about adult survivors of child sexual abuse, they're 2 times as likely to be arrested for a property offense and almost times as likely to be arrested for a violent offense. You're going to see protection orders, even if they're not convicted of like felony domestic violence. You will see police reports for domestic violence calls. Um, you'll see protection orders in the case of like Rachel Hamlin, who was Rachel Jones. She was married to Tyler David Jones. They got divorced. And in 2014 in California, at the time that all of this had started to kind of hit the fan, she took out a protection order, or she tried to take out a protection order in California against her ex husband, Tyler David Jones. And she was unsuccessful. So you're going to see trace evidence and documentary evidence of this. So you're also going to see a history of health problems. They're 30% more likely to have diabetes, cancer, heart problems, stroke, or hypertension as non abused adults. They're more than 2 to 4 times as likely to be diagnosed with eating disorders or obesity. If you were to Google Angela Fenton and a lot of other members' children, what you will notice is that many of them are clearly obese. You'll notice that a lot of them die young from things like cancer or strokes or heart problems. They have chronic health issues. So we're talking about people who are dying in their 30s, 40s, and 50s who are members of these families. They're dying much earlier than a traditional Mormon does. And
mm,
because Mormons have a longevity of life that outstrips the rest of the general population. So this is unusual. So within the Church of Satan, many of the accused parties are divorced. Ann Meacham Gregerson, David and Roselle Hamlin, James and Linda Erickson, Robert Lee and June Adams Hamlin, Jeffrey and Janae Jones, Norman and Cindy Van Wagenen, Gordon Bowen and Barbara Timothy, and others. They're divorced. And in the Mormon population, given the cultural emphasis on eternal sealings and so on and so forth, it's not common compared to the rest of the population. But when you live this kind of a lifestyle where you are essentially swapping wives, swapping spouses, so on and so forth, you're engaged in abuse, it does not lend itself to domestic stability. It doesn't lend itself to lasting relationships. Eventually, things break down. Like the stressors of this, you can't be engaged in this over a long period of time and not have it affect your personal and professional relationships. So Rachel Hamlin, Tyler David Jones, divorced. They had a disabled child named Sophia, I believe her name was, who had a childhood accident involving a swimming pool. She was developmentally disabled. and she passed away before she was 13, I believe. So within the wider CS network, you're going to see polygamists like James Harmston and Tom Green. These are men who have non biological children in their homes because they married women with children from previous relationships. And this is a matter of convenience for them. In the case of Tom Green, he married three of his stepdaughters. That means that the women that he was married to had daughters, and he married three of them, two when they were 14 and one when she was 13.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. So again, you're looking at stepfathers and stepmothers. You're looking at divorce. You're looking at live in partners, which Tom Green technically was a live in partner because he could only be legally married to one of those women at a time. So it
Yeah,
fits any way that you slice it. You're going to see female offenders operating at the direction and behest of a dominant male figure. In the Church of Satan, this takes the form of the paterfamilias, who has total control over his wife and children. Remember that phrase that keeps coming up. He invoked the wisdom of parents. Um,
yeah,
so they have a justification that's systemic, to condition their children to accept this and to condition their wives to accept this. You're going to see women like Carla Jemison reinforcing the dictates of men like Gordon Bowen when her daughter is bought out, stripped naked, and sodomized by a 14-year-old boy. When the daughter didn't want to get undressed, it was Carla Jemison who stepped forward and slapped her in the victim statements. It wasn't Gordon Bowen. Gordon Bowen just told her, like when she spoke, to shut her whoring mouth. So you've got a mother who is assenting to the abuse of her child in that situation, but the dominant person in that situation, the one directing the action, is a male in that case, allegedly Gordon Bowen. And then you've got a 14-year-old boy whose parents would have been present and who would have assented to his abuse in that situation as well within the same dynamic. So you're seeing protective orders issued against Gordon Bowen. You're seeing allegations of domestic or sexual abuse against Bowen and Hamlin. Um, Same thing with Timothy Nathan Tuttle. You're seeing arrest records and police reports that detail repeated issues between Roselle Anderson and her daughters during their teenage years. In the early 2000s, Rachel had started to move on. She was an adult by the late 90s, and she was getting married. But the other three girls who were still in the home were still having issues. The victim statements explicitly allege that even after the divorce, David Lee Hamlin was still coming to the house until at least 2006 to commit the abuse. So he was present in the Provo condominium. So you see a clear pattern of mental illness and delusion for Gordon Bowen from his divorce proceedings. You can watch the depositions that Backer put on his YouTube presentation. He believed that spirits were physically attacking him and inhabiting his body and making him a homosexual. This is a clear sign of mental illness. And you're going to see that in a lot of these abusers. You're going to see things that don't make logical sense. Their beliefs don't make any sense. It's not real, it's not rational, but it's what they believe, and it plays into the pathology of their abuse. So, one or two of these factors may not be indicative of the veracity of an abuse allegation, but when the factors pile up in the way that they do among the members of the Church of Satan, the probability that the abuse allegations are true rises exponentially. So when you are investigating an accusation or a set of accusations, these are the indicators that you want to look for among the accused, the victims, and their families. Because you don't want to spend all of your time chasing non credible accusations or accusations that aren't likely true. That's a waste of your time, it's a waste of your skill. So you consider these factors as a means of measuring the credibility of the allegations. It's extremely rare that a credible factual abuse allegation of child sexual abuse will not fit into any of these categories. If the allegation does not fit in any of these categories, there's an excellent chance that the accuser is lying. We know that between the studies that I've seen, 4 to 8% do so. It's not your job to rehabilitate lying accusers, even if what they say is partially true. So they could be telling the truth in part about some of the allegations or some of the things that they witnessed. But if they have lied and you catch them in a lie, it is very difficult to help them get any sort of result in court or through the criminal. They have no credibility. Any defense attorney worth their salt will rip them apart. So you have to make a very difficult and sometimes heartbreaking decision to move on. Part of this involves being rational, cold, and objective. It means that you don't get emotionally invested to the point of being blind and subjective, because if you do, your credibility is going to be on the line as well. Over the time that you do this, eventually, inevitably, hopefully, you will build relationships with local law enforcement. And part of those relationships will be establishing your credibility, that you don't bite on bad accusations. You don't go for sensationalism. You stick with facts and you stick with things that are credible. That will aid you and any legitimate victim in the future. So, ritual abuse is real, but the things you want to avoid in investigations, you want to stick with just the facts. Ritualized abuse is not illegal or relevant to the criminal or civil liability that attaches to the abuse. What we want to focus on when we're investigating and documenting things, specific physical or sexual abuse allegations that tie to a statutory crime or a civil violation. The only way ritual abuse is really relevant in that respect is if it plays into some sort of mental health pathology, as is the case with somebody like Gordon Bowen, who hired David Lee Hamlin to exorcise female spirits from him so that he could go from being 90% gay to 10% gay. You can focus on that aspect because it's relevant to whether Gordon Bowen is rational and sane, mentally well, that sort of thing. But generally speaking, we want to emphasize the criminal acts. We don't want to emphasize the sensational aspects of ritualism. It's not a crime to worship Satan. It is a crime to rape, torture, or murder children and adults. So you want to avoid being pulled beyond the specific case or instance that you are investigating. You want to keep your focus on the immediate case, and you want to resist the urge to put it into a grand context like Pizzagate or MK Ultra. For those of you who heard my podcast appearances with Jenny Hatch and with with what was um having a brain lapse, the most recent one I did, you notice that when those topics came up, I acknowledged them, but I switched the subject back to the Hamlin case as fast as possible. So the reason for that is when we sell the public and law enforcement on the credibility of the specific accusations in the immediate case we are investigating, if we go beyond our case, we take on the burden of proving things like Pizzagate, MK Ultra, and other cases. You're making your task far more difficult, and you're making it more likely that our findings will get lumped in with those cases and
And
dismissed.
dismissed.
Yeah. So we don't want to do that. Um, if you're going to be a serious investigative researcher, that is not something you want to do in your own name. If you have a website and you want to focus on all that stuff, do it anonymously. I get it. It's fun. The public bites on it. I'm a huge conspiracy theory guy. I have a ton of DVDs on it, but I don't publicly go crazy about it or whatnot. Um, we want to focus our attention as narrowly as possible and as narrowly as necessary to obtain relief for victims and exposure for perpetrators. So anything that specifically pertains to your case is going to be relevant information. And anything beyond your case is irrelevant to the objective of proving the guilt of perpetrators and achieving a criminal conviction or a civil judgment. Now, I'll give you guys a little bit of an example. Um, about a month back, I was approached by a victims advocate who had a cluster of 30 victims. And I said, well, if they're not overlapping with the Hamlin case, there's not a lot I can do with them.
Okay.
I can refer you to somebody else. But two of the victims did overlap with the Hamlin case. So that piqued my interest about the wider group. So five of those victims are purportedly signing on with a law firm in Salt Lake to pursue civil liability against the perpetrators. But you want to narrow your focus. You always want to have like mission focus instead of mission creep. So you have a specific mission, a set task, and if you want to be truly effective as an investigative researcher, you're going to discipline your focus to that mission and that task alone. So the
Mhm.
only relevance that other cases will have to your case is if the perpetrators are the same or if the patterns of behavior overlap. So regardless, you also want to resist the urge to publicly discuss the specifics of other cases beyond your immediate case. Again, I cannot say this enough. Always shift the conversation back to your case if you're talking back to the media, the public, or private parties such as the police. The other thing you want to do, you never, ever say anything negative about another case, a victim outside of your case, another researcher, or another activist. You change the subject back to your case immediately. I can't speak to that because I haven't investigated, but I can say this about my current case. You don't want to be
Mhm.
drawn into discussions about other cases, other victims, other researchers, other activists, or other offenders who you have not or are not currently investigating. Even if they say something about you, don't argue with idiots on the internet or in person. Don't feed the trolls. When you undertake an investigative project, your sole job and focus is to become an absolute expert on that specific project. Now, over time, you're going to build expertise across multiple projects that you may reference as you go on, but your main focus is always your current project. So, when doing podcasts or media or even during private discussions, you want to control the conversation by focusing only on the project that you are advocating for at that moment. You just politely and professionally bring it back to the project that you are currently working, the victims you are currently working for, and the objective that you are trying to achieve. And most of all, this is one of the most important things in this presentation.
Mm.
If you do not know, say, I do not know. Do not try to fake it until you make it because you will get busted. The smartest people I know how to say four words. I don't
Uh,
know.
no.
And the thing that you should follow up with, I don't know, but I'll do my best to find out or to get you an answer.
Right.
But don't lie. So your specific tools and investigations, I use WPS as a document suite, specifically its word processor and its spreadsheet. I'm going to show you that later tonight. It's basically a more functional and equally full-featured version of Microsoft Office that I find works better than Microsoft Office. I pay an annual subscription for the software, like $20. I use Keynote, which is Apple's like
Yeah.
version for this presentation because I find it to be much more streamlined. I have used Maltego. It's an open source intelligence tool that you can Google. It provides real time data mining and intelligence, which it then presents in a node based graphic. So the community edition is free. Other editions become more expensive depending on how many features are incorporated into it and how powerful it is. I also
Mm.
use Dropbox, Ancestry, Spokio, ClipGrab, OpenShot, Inkscape, and GIMP for graphic design, Scalpel for mind maps and notes, and I pay either a monthly or a lifetime subscription fee for the software or services that aren't free. I also use various VPNs in my work for security purposes, among other items. So
Yeah.
for handwritten notes, I use a Rocketbook in the past, and I
Oh,
use a Books Note tablet with e-paper, e-ink. And the reason is simple. I had filing cabinets full of notepads and notebooks, and shipping the material to clients if they owned it at the conclusion of a project. Like you're talking about bankers' boxes that you have to tape,
yeah.
and you have to take it to a FedEx and everything. If I
Right.
digitize my notes and everything, it makes it simple to zip drive them, give them to the client on a thumb drive or a shared drive, delete my copies to comply with the contract. It also frees up physical space for my living
Oh,
quarters.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
this is a major stressor when I was married. If you have a spouse, you have to be cognizant of the fact that you don't want to have a workspace that starts to consume the house. So avoid having too many tools because it results in decision fatigue from having too many options. You want your processes to be as streamlined as possible so that you focus on your investigative work rather than your tools. So
Yeah.
you don't want to have a bunch of options for mind mapping and whatnot, like pick one. For hardware, I prefer MacBook Pros on the laptop side with at least 16 gigabytes of memory or RAM and 512 gigabytes plus of memory, solid state drive if possible. I use Western Digital external hard drives for backups and PNY thumb drives. I prefer Intel chips with AMD graphics on my MacBook. The newer ones have M2s. That's fine. Um, but I prefer the older ones like before 2016 or so. I
Mhm.
use a dual monitor setup with two Acer monitors. My entire hardware setup is under $1,200 all in. So it doesn't take a lot to do what I do
Sure.
in terms of hardware, because you can go on Amazon and buy a refurbished MacBook from like 2015, and you can wait for sales on the other items. Like I save my fund money every month, and then at the end of the year, I make major purchases in terms of hardware or software or other things that I would use in work. So we have about a minute left in this particular Zoom chat, which means I'm going to have to stop the sharing and everything. I'm going to send you all another link. Is that okay?
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to sign off, and then I'm going to send you another another link.
Okay, very good. Thanks. Mhm.